For the past 4 years, I've worked with the Heart Project with Karen Alsop, a nonprofit project where we create magical holiday portraits for hundreds of ill children worldwide who unfortunately will not be home for the holidays. For some of these families, this was their child's first professional photo. For others, this may be their last. This year, I got to work on a portrait for Grace, a bubbly little girl fighting a rare autoimmune disease. Grace loves dogs, and she wanted a magical scene created from the photo she took with Santa. In this video, I'll walk you through the composite I made for Grace, as well as show you 3 professional compositing techniques I'm sure you'll love, including creating rim light around hair, custom brushes for edges, and matching brightness. By the way, make sure you check out the description. There's a link to the Heart Project and all the beautiful composites created for these children. Let's start by reviewing the Photoshop file, then we'll focus on the 3 in-depth techniques. From the Layers panel, you'll see that everything is organized and labeled. That is something you always want to do. It makes it easier for you and others to work with the same file. The background image is created from the same background photo, cut up into pieces and reorganized throughout the composite. Remember, if your background image is not large enough to fit your canvas, you can always duplicate it and transform those layers to fit your scene. The floors in the final composite come from these layers. They were placed in a smart object and transformed to match the angle and perspective of the original floors. And adjustment layers were used to match the brightness. Also, I've applied a tilt shift to create the shallow depth of field to match the background. The foreground elements are in this group, including the dog, Grace's hair, and inside this group, we have 2 more groups, one with Grace and one with Santa. The couch is here. Then I place a merged duplicate of those layers into a smart object and apply the final adjustments with the camera raw filter. And on top of all that, I added sparkles to make it more magical. Now let's take an in-depth look at the 3 compositing techniques that I'm sure will help you tremendously in your projects. Let's start by looking at Grace's hair. Applying rim lights to the subjects in your composites can be difficult, but I'll show you an easy technique that will get you great results. This is what the composite looks like with the rim light. And by disabling this group, you can see the original image. Notice that the masking is very simple, just a sharp line. And I added the rim light from another photo. And this photo came from Adobe Stock. If you just type in rim light portrait on Adobe Stock, you'll get a ton of images that you can use. You can also try searching for images under the free section, and maybe you can find something that you can use for your projects. So this is the image that I found. Once you find the image, enable the lasso tool and make a selection around the parts of the hair you want to use. Then you can press Ctrl+C to copy, come back into your working document and paste. And there it is. I'll zoom out. I'll select the move tool and press Ctrl+T to transform. I like to have my pivot point, or as is officially called, the reference point, enabled. And that just allows me to move it to a location and then rotate it. So that kind of becomes the hinge. And if you hold Shift and Alt, you can scale to that location. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this right about here, right on top of Grace's hair. I'm going to move this over like so, and I can rotate and match it to her hair as best as possible. Then you can change the blending mode to screen and you can see the result. It's actually not the perfect position here, so I can move it over to the left a little bit more. And now with the screen blending mode, I can actually see what's going on. So again, I'll press Ctrl+T to transform. Use the spacebar to pan so I can see the transformation handles. And again, move the reference point, place it there, and rotate from that reference point. If things are not lining up, you can always right-click and select warp and just warp the image so that it fits your model. In this case, so that it fits Grace's hair. Now, the way the screen blending mode works is by showing pixels that are bright and hiding pixels that are dark. So the brighter the pixel is, the more it shows. So we can brighten the hair up to make it more visible. Go into Image, Adjustment, and Curves. You can think of the curves adjustment as a dimmer light switch like what you might have at home. If you drag above this line, you will brighten the image by adding more light, just like dragging a dimmer switch up to make a room brighter. And dragging below this line will reduce the light and darken the image, much like dragging the dimmer switch down and darkening a room. So you can drag up from this point to brighten the layer, and drag down from here to darken the darkest pixels. And adjust it any way you like. And this looks very, very good. You can press OK. And you'll notice that some of these pixels are still visible, some of the straight edges from her hair. The way I fixed that was just by pressing Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac to duplicate the layer. And that just creates a stronger effect. Then put these layers into a group, click on them while holding Shift, then press Ctrl-G and apply a layer mask. And paint away the edges that you don't want to see on your final design, like so. Again, I'm going quickly here, but I think you get the idea. This is what my final result looks like. I think it looks great. You don't have to worry about painting in rim light. You're just bringing it in from another image. And also the dog group is on top, so it hides a lot of the imperfections on her dress. Also, I want to point out I used the same technique on her flyaway hair behind her shoulder, and I also painted individual hair strands to hide the sharp line created by the mask. For the composited hair, I used a different photo, this one here. When you view the image at 100%, all those details look great. Next, I want to show you the importance of creating custom brushes for the edges of your layer masks. First, let me run through the layers panel so that you can see what we have. I have Santa in a group and the gray background layer so that we can see what we're doing. The transparency background can be a little bit misleading, but we have this group, and inside of that group, we have two layers. We have this image of Santa, and Santa had to wear a mask. He couldn't be near Grace without it, so I have another photo of Santa without the mask. So I had to composite that in, and that is just a very simple mask. As you can see here, we have just a black mask with white to reveal the face over his body. It's a very simple composite with just two layers. The next step is to remove the background with a layer mask. And this can be a challenging effect because he has a lot of fur. His edges, as you can see, are very, very difficult, not easy to work with. Let me show you the technique I use, which got me great results. First, we need to select Santa. To do so, I'll start by enabling the Object Selection tool. And make sure you check both Object Finder and Sample All Layers. When you check this box, you'll see an overlay when you hover over Santa. If you uncheck Sample Layers, the overlay will appear over the entire image. Because this image is composed of two photos and we want Photoshop to take both into account when it makes a selection. Now with both these options enabled, you can hover over the image and click on Santa to make a selection. The selection is not perfect, but it's good enough. What I'll do now is click on the layer mask icon to add a mask to the group. And that is something that you need to keep in mind. I'm creating the layer mask in the group, not the individual layers. And the reason that I'm doing that is so that I can add other layers, like an adjustment layer, and it will only affect the contents of that group. I'll delete this because we don't need it. I'm going to now enable this gray background layer just so that we can see the edges. Again, the mask is not perfect. We will need to fine tune it. We don't have enough time in this video to cover the entire process, but I will show you a technique I'm sure you will enjoy. In a recent tutorial, I showed you how to create a fur brush, which is exactly the same brush I use on other parts of this image. The link to that video is below in the description. But in this video, I want to show you how to create a more advanced brush to get more difficult edges on this part of Santa's suit, and we'll use that same brush to create the rim light. First, go into File and New to create a new document. Make it 2500 by 2500 pixels. You want a large document so you can create a large brush. And again, this technique is very similar to that recent tutorial, but there's a few differences. What you want to do now is select the pen tool. Make sure that shape is enabled from the dropdown, disable the fill, and set a stroke. Next, click over the canvas to create something that looks like a curled strand of hair. Notice that I didn't close the path. That's very important. Hit the Enter key to complete the path and start a second one. Now, with a little bit more time, this is what I created. The few differences are that these particular strokes are now 26 pixels, so I made them a little bit thicker. And another important thing that you need to do is make sure that the cap is a rounded cap. And the way that you do that is by, first of all, selecting all the paths that you created, and you can do so by clicking on one, holding Shift and clicking on the bottommost path, like so that they're all selected and you can see them highlighted in blue. Then, with this drop down, make sure that under caps, you select the center one, this rounded one. Look at the difference. When I select this one, notice how flat the cap becomes. We actually want a rounded cap. That way it looks more like hair or fur. So this is my final result. And again, as you can see, it doesn't look like much. It's just a bunch of lines that look like a fur ball. And what you're going to do at this point is go into Edit and select Define Brush Preset. Call it Fur Ball if you like, whatever name you want to give it. Once you commit the changes, you'll have a brush. Now, I'm going to create a new layer and fill with white just so that we can see what we're doing. And when we paint, notice that this really doesn't look like fur. And what we want to do instead is click on this icon to enable the brush settings and make some adjustments. Keep an eye out on the preview window here. This is going to give you a visual representation of the changes that we apply. Start by going into the brush tip shape. And from here, just increase the spacing a little bit like so. Then go into Shape Dynamics and increase the size jitter. This is going to make each individual brush stroke a different size so that they're not all the same size. Then increase the angle jitter to 100%. This is going to rotate all these brush tips so that each time you paint, it randomly rotates to a different degree and you get that result. And it looks fantastic. Then make sure you check the Flip X jitter. That way the brush tip lives on the horizontal axis. And check the Flip Y jitter to flip it on the vertical axis as well. And you can see the result. This is looking much, much better. What we're going to do now is go into scattering and increase the scatter just a bit, just to scatter them up, and increase the count to make it fuller. And that looks pretty good. At this point, you may want to save your brush tip so that you don't have to reapply these settings. You can do so by going into the new brush preset and give it a name, Furval 735. You can leave it there if you want, or you might want to enter the brush size. In this case, 2512, and that's what I'll do. So now when I paint, I get this result. Now, this is a huge brush, and the reason that we made it large is so that we have flexibility now. We can make this brush much tinier, and when we paint, we get that result, and it looks fantastic. So we're going to use this on the Santa layer, and we're just going to focus on this area here. Obviously, working on every area of the suit will take too long, but rest assured, this is the same technique I used on the rest of the suit, but only using a different brush. And as I mentioned before, the brush that I use for the bottom part of the suit here is the brush that I used in the previous tutorial. The link is in the description. But anyway, so what we want to do now is create some room to work with here. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. You can easily contract the selection by selecting the lasso tool and just making a selection like so, where you want to erase those pixels. Black is my foreground color. So now on the Santa group layer mask, I can fill with black. Control and backspace. And by the way, I probably would also work on this area at the same time. So I'm going to fill that with black. And I guess I'll take a bit more time to fix the glasses. With a saffron brush, paint around the edges. And here's a quick tip for you. You can click once, hold shift, click again to draw a straight line between 2 points, like so. But you want to paint with black so that you hide. So click, hold shift, click again, and Photoshop will draw a straight line between those 2 points. And that can help you expedite the process just a little bit. And obviously you don't want to create lines that are super straight, so you want to click and hold shift often so that you can create the illusion that the line that you're painting is curved. But I think you get the idea. This is not the perfect mask, but it'll help illustrate the technique that I use to create that effect there. What I'm going to do now is select the brush that we just created. It's way down here on the bottom, Furball 2512, and make sure that white is your foreground color and increase your brush size. You may have to experiment. So I'm going to just paint with white and see the result. And this looks pretty good. It's not too bad. What you want to do is keep going back and forth, maybe reduce the brush size a bit, but go back and forth until that line, that edge is gone. You just don't want that line to be visible. And I'm just going to go back and forth fairly quickly here. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on small details. I just want to give you the overview of the technique. And then in this case, just paint in like so. That way we get that inside of the glasses there. And this is looking pretty good. What I'm gonna do now is increase my brush size. And I'm just gonna click a couple times like so, and you can sort of see where Photoshop is going to place the brush stroke. So I'm just creating these longer hair strands. And by the way, something I'm doing here is I'm exaggerating the effect so that you can see it. Notice that on my final result, I didn't make it so exaggerated, but I'm exaggerating a bit more here for the example. So something like this works great. What you want to do at this point is create a new layer on top of all of that. And by the way, I created my layer inside of the group. To move the layer up in the layer stack, I'll press Control and the right bracket key, and there it is. Then you can press Control, Alt, G to create a clipping mask. This down pointing arrow is now telling us that this layer will only affect the Santa group. And what you want to do is select just a regular brush, a soft round brush, and select the color of Santa's suit here and paint. And notice that we're removing that green from the green screen. And what you want to do is get the detail back. We only want the color from this layer. We don't want to flatten the pixels below. So you can change the blending mode to color, which keeps the hue and saturation of this layer, but the luminosity of the layers below. So you can use this blending mode to remove the green screen from the edges. Now, if you notice on the Santa here, I actually created the rim light as well. And I used the brush that you've been looking at so far to create this effect. So let me show you how I did that. I'm going to go back into my Santa document. I'm going to create a new layer. Control Alt G to clip it to the layers below. I'll make white my foreground color and I'll paint like so. So this is the rim light. And again, I'm going to exaggerate it so that you can see how this works. Obviously, you don't want this rim light over the glasses. Here's another keyboard shortcut for you. If you hold the tilde key, that's the top left key on your keyboard in North American keyboards below the escape key. If you hold that as you paint, you will erase with the same brush you have active, which is fantastic. So there you go. Once you have the rim light, what you need to do is create a layer mask and go back into the brushes and select the fur ball brush that you created earlier and simply paint with black to hide pixels. Like so. See that? It creates that effect there. Once again, I'm exaggerating it for the example. Something you should note is that the fur is out of focus, so it's a good idea to blur this mask. With the layer mask selected, you can go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and maybe apply about a pixel or so of blur, whatever you think matches the image. 1.1 might be too much. Maybe 0.6 will work, and you can press OK. Then you gotta go into the Santa layer mask, and with the blur tool, just paint over that mask to blur the edges. If you blur the mask too much, the way to bring that back is by going into Edit, Fade, Blur Tool. The Fade command will reduce the intensity of the last thing you applied, in this case, the blur tool. And then you can just bring down the opacity, like so, until you find something that works, and you can press OK. I'll double click on the zoom tool to fit the image to screen, and that's the result. And notice that that is much better than any selection we could have made. Again, I intensified the effect to make it noticeable for the tutorial, but as you will notice on my final version, it's a much more subtle effect, and that's what you want. By the way, if this video is teaching you anything new, make sure you like and subscribe. Next, let's look at the couch. I think you will learn several valuable techniques by understanding how it's placed within the composite. I started out by placing the couch into the scene. Then I converted the couch into a smart object. In case you don't know, a smart object is a container that can hold one or more layers, and you can apply non-destructive adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformations. In other words, everything remains editable. When you double-click on the smart object thumbnail, it opens up the contents in a new tab. I've applied a vector mask to remove the background. I use the vector mask because they give you the smoothest and sharpest edges, making vector mask perfect for objects like this. To create a vector mask, all you need to do is select the curvature pen tool, make sure that you select path, and just create a path around your image. And what I like to start by creating just a very basic path, like so. Nothing fancy, just very, very basic to get the main shape. Then you can go into corners like here and double click to straighten those lines. See how I'm double clicking and the lines become straight. And then you can click in between two paths like so, two vector points, and you can just round the edges to make it fit the object that you're working with. Again, double click to set a corner point, and I can probably place that one here and then just continue making these adjustments to get the result that I want. Obviously, this will take a little time. I'm not going to go through the entire process, but you get the idea. Double click on the points that need to be straight and click in between the path to add a point and drag so that it matches the object. When you're done, hold Control and click on the mask icon to create a vector path. If this happens to you, that's because this option here in the options bar is set to subtract front shape. You want it to be up here where it says combine shapes. When you do that, notice that now the vector path only reveals the couch, and you can continue adjusting the couch accordingly by adding more points. Like I said, I'm not going to worry about creating the perfect mask in this case. I already have that, so I'm going to bring that back by pressing the F12 key to revert. File and revert right here, F12. It's grayed out because I just pressed it, so there's nothing to go back to. Revert brings you back to your last save point. So now that the couch is in the scene, what we need to do is we need to add a shadow. So I just painted some shadows in, nothing fancy. Also in the final image, I added a color lookup adjustment layer to create a color effect. But you'll notice that the couch doesn't seem quite right. And the reason is that the couch is much brighter than the background. You can tell that this photo wasn't shot on this scene. So I'll show you how to adjust the couch to make it seem like it really belongs in this scene. First, you need to match the brightness of the couch to the background. Here's a trick to make the problem easier to see. First, create a hue and saturation adjustment layer and reduce the saturation to -100. With a black and white image, your eye will not be distracted by color, and you can better see the mismatch in brightness. Can you now see how much brighter the couch is in the background? To match the brightness, we'll create a levels adjustment layer just above the couch layer. Click on this icon to clip it to the layer below, or you can use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Alt-G. I don't like to leave a layer mask if it's not going to control anything, so I'll delete it. You can leave it if you want. Now, what are we doing here? We're trying to make it seem as if this couch belonged in that background. So if it's too bright, we clearly have to make it darker. So we'll select the white point and drag it to the left. And notice that when we do that, we start getting the image darker. And this image now looks like it belongs more in the scene. And what's happening here is that we're making the brightest pixel in this image now this light shade of gray. The brightest pixel in the image used to be white, but now we're telling Photoshop, make it this light shade of gray, which is why it's getting darker. Also, if you notice, the background has no pure black, so maybe we should move the black point to the right just so that there is no pure black on this couch either. And then we can adjust these controls to make the couch fit better within the scene. This is obviously the black point. The way to think about this slider is to think about what pixels will become the darkest color. This is now saying that all the pixels that are this shade of gray or darker will become the darkest color, which is this shade of almost black, this dark gray. If I move this over to the right, you'll notice now that the darkest color is now this shade of gray, almost a 50% gray. So now we're telling Photoshop all the pixels that are this shade of gray right here and darker will become this shade of almost mid-gray. If I move it to the left, we're now telling Photoshop that all the pixels that are this shade of gray or darker will be black. This is why the couch looks like this. So in your composites, fine-tune the levels adjustment until your object has the same brightness as the background. If you can make the black and white version work, you'll definitely make the color version work. Watch what happens when I bring back the saturation to the image. It looks much, much better. This is before, and this is after. Then when I apply the color lookup adjustment layer, everything looks great. Obviously, the final image had more shadows and highlights, but this levels technique to match the brightness got me most of the way there. By the way, to see the high resolution image and a video breakdown, check out my Behance page. The link is below in the description.